Firstly, I just want to say a big thank you, Simon, for setting me up perfectly with just highlighting how much debriefing seems to be this sexy topic that we all need to talk about, we all need to think about. And it's not going to be any sort of new concept to anybody in this room, but it's also something I think we can agree we've probably seen done well and seen done not so well. So there's many reasons that I think debriefing can be a super powerful thing that we can utilize. But I just want to break it down into a few separate areas so that we can really try to ensure that when we're involved within these, that we're getting the most out of it for ourselves and our teams and the broader teams that we fit within that we possibly can. So it's a little bit like we always think about, for us, a job does not start just as soon as we arrive and we see a patient. That whole thing that prior to that, we've got our 0-point survey where we're checking in with ourselves and our team and we're making a plan. And that really can help, as we've seen talked about earlier today, with our CRM for making sure that jobs run smoothly. And in exactly the same way, I do not think that our job's finish just when we deliver a patient to the hospital. There's everything that's come before, that whole culmination of all of the series of events that can sometimes be quite complex and quite confronting, that we really need to ensure are fully unpicked afterwards. So our closing moments, our denouement, is actually a really vital part of our jobs as well. And I think the purpose of this was just to break it down a little bit into a few of the different reasons that we're actually getting involved in doing these debriefs. So it's very apparent that psychological safety is massively important across not only this organisation, but all of the other wider teams that we work within. But that's not the only purpose of us doing a debrief. Often there can be this idea that a job is run in a certain way or that certain events have happened that may not necessarily match the same way that your junior paramedic who's on the scene has seen everything taking place. The other thing is that we get all of this training, we do fantastic simulations here, but actually when we're doing that in the constraints of a safe car park where there's several people around us and watching, it's really different to when we're at a busy roadside scene and we're confronted with police and fire services and chaos. And actually the lessons that we learn from those real life and real live situations are super different from what we actually just can learn within a simulated scenario. We are so lucky that we've got a great culture here of ensuring that we promote learning and feedback. But we're in a very unique position where we sort of straddle the worlds of pre-hospital and in-hospital. And I think that we need to ensure that we're using that platform to empower other staff members around us to be involved in that same culture of learning and feedback too. So the interactions that we have with other colleagues, whether that be on the road or in an in-hospital environment, are the perfect time for us to develop collegiality across lots of different roles. Now, as with many things within our CRM, the roots of this is embedded in aviation and forces industries. But much like that, the old method whereby the top-down, very negative, critical, and ineffective manner of debriefing has been thrown out of the window, we too have realised that having smaller, peer-led, non-punitive discussions that actually allow us to have self-reflection and to be curious and inquire how things went well, why they maybe didn't go so well, really does help us to discover ways that we can improve in the future as well. Now, there's a lot of different types of debriefing that I think we could go through and we could unpick. And to be honest, in today's talk, I'm mostly going to be focusing on our hot debrief. So this is what happens in the immediate aftermath of a job. It should be sharp, it should have a very clear agenda, and it needs to have a leader. And that doesn't actually have to be anybody in this room. Often it will be an inspector or a dom who's on the scene. If you're in hospital, it may be another member of the hospital team rather than yourselves. But I think we should also be willing to pick up that role when it's needed. And it can fall to the most senior person or just a person who's comfortable with having an overview. And I'm also not going to take away from the fact that cold debriefing can be super helpful too. Mark, your talk this morning, I cannot imagine you being able to have unpicked or got rid of all of the things that you needed to from a hot debrief in the immediate aftermath. And there's certain jobs that there will be an absolute need to meet up again and arrange a time and a set place and sufficient time as well to get people together to really be able to unpick events that are highly complicated. So I'm not belittling that process. And that process can have these more extensive defined manners in terms of how you run through them. But for us, no two debriefs are likely to look the same. So we have our physician and paramedic, smaller teams, our 4-person pilot, crewman, doctor, paramedic teams, and our doctor, flight nurse, and pilot teams, and we're going on fixed wing jobs. But those typically always are going to be fitting into something else. And whether that's with other paramedics, ICPs, or other New South Wales ambulance people on the road, fire service, police, or in hospital with a myriad of different health specialists, not just doctors and nurses, but social workers, healthcare assistants, and other people who may be present. We need to have the emotional intelligence and flexibility to be able to adapt to those situations and appreciate that we can't simply rely on a one-size-fits-all model for delivering an effective debrief. Now, can I just ask in the room, who here has ever had any formal teaching on how to do debriefing? So that's about 4 or 5 from 50. And I think that's really interesting because it is something that is encouraged and is meant to be part of most jobs that we do. But I'm not convinced that many people have had formal teaching at all. And having chatted to quite a few of the different paramedics on base as well, and as well as talking to paramedics who are currently going through their training, it's not part of the university syllabus. It's not something that is particularly well encouraged to be taught within your role. And it's just something that I wanted you to think about as to whether we maybe need to consider doing some more teaching on. Now, I don't think I need to preach to any of you here about the fact that our job is pretty weird in terms of the stuff that we end up seeing. It is not normal that the most stressful and traumatic event that happens in one person's life, we will see sometimes on a weekly or daily occurrence as being a member of an emergency services field. And I just want that to really sink in for a second because it is abnormal. And I loved your point that you made that even the SAS services love to talk about their feelings. And I think it's super important that we do acknowledge this and don't just brush it aside as being an eye roll to psychological safety. There are lots of people now who are getting burnt out, who are leaving professions of emergency services because it's too much. And we're under a lot of pressure a lot of the time. So one of the most vital parts of a debrief is to just allow that thought dump. It's to give people the space to breathe again after they've been involved in something that is too much. And there'll be points that things will be too much. Maybe not for you or for the person who's with you from this service, but for other members within that team who probably don't go to some of the scenes that we go to on as regular an occurrence. Now, the other big thing is that we will tend to walk into an evolving scene. So the problem with coming into something halfway through or partway through is that even with the best handover in the world, we're very likely to miss certain things that have happened in the timescale running up to that point, or that we will just fill in the gaps of what we think probably happened. And therefore, all of the events that had happened to these other set of people and other set of team members are not sometimes realized by us and not always given the space and opportunity to get spoken about and aired. It's a natural tendency that we need to work in an environment where we've got resuscitation happening all at one time. And the thing with that is that as you're task focused, as we've all seen from when we've been involved with roaming creatures going through the back of simulations, when you are task focused, you lose that situation awareness. Now, pause points and recaps are very effective tools that we have to make sure that we try to keep people as on board as possible when we're continuing our journey of the patient care. But we also do owe it to our junior staff to ensure that we all have a shared model of exactly what's taken place beforehand. And this in part does tie in with the teaching culture as well, and ensuring that people are getting as much as they possibly can from the jobs that they've been involved with. Now, I listened to a talk recently where there was a move away from us being seen as cogs within a greater machine, and that's part of the organization that we're within. We're not cogs. We're all people. And the thing with that is that I like to think that we're all organisms that are part of a greater living thing. And people are flawed. We're going to make mistakes, and we're not necessarily going to have absolutely everything run smoothly 100% of the time. And that's fine. And that's why we train to be as good as we can be, but not training for that perfect, as we discussed earlier. But I do think it is super important as well that we acknowledge the fact that work within a real world environment poses different challenges. And it poses massive opportunities for us to identify real chances to make a difference in workflows and in systems, as well as then in ourselves and in our teams, for jobs to just run a little bit better.